The tiramisu sat untouched before her, layers of mascarpone that usually brought comfort after 16-hour workdays. Sophia's gentle hands lifted the silver spoon, seeking one moment of sweetness in a world that had forgotten kindness, where harshness had dominated her for years, without her knowing that this dessert would taste very different from her usual familiar treat. Across the dining room, Marcus Williams had planned every detail of this moment, the timing, the preparation, the perfect opportunity that his employers had orchestrated. He bent down to continue his cleaning work, having calculated the exact timing to speak and execute the plan. "Don't eat that!" These words tore from Marcus's throat, making all of space seem to stop flowing, as the woman looked at him with eyes full of amazement. The spoon clattered onto the marble floor, and Marcus realized he had just completed something important. Marcus Williams adjusted the worn leather boxing glove hanging from his cleaning cart's handle, the only piece of equipment he'd kept from his martial arts days, now serving as his daughter's lucky charm. Chloe had tied a red ribbon around his wrist that morning, her ritual for keeping Daddy safe at work. He touched the ribbon now, executing his breathing pattern, 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 8 counts out, as he watched Sophia Blackwood through his peripheral vision. 3 months of meticulous planning had led to this moment. Marcus had mapped every exit, timed every staff rotation, calculated sightlines and response windows down to fractions of seconds. His over-planning had become obsessive since Sarah's death. If he could control every variable, maybe he could prevent another tragedy. But tonight felt different. As Sophia lifted her fork toward the tiramisu, Marcus noticed something that hadn't appeared in any of his reconnaissance. Genuine exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward like someone carrying invisible weight. It reminded him of his own reflection during those first months after the accident. The plan was surgical in its precision. Chef Romano had prepared her dessert with finely ground pine nuts mixed into the mascarpone. Virtually invisible, but potentially deadly to someone with Sophia's severe allergy. Marcus would notice the danger, intervene heroically, and earn the trust that would open doors to her inner circle. Marcus's employers had presented this as corporate intelligence gathering, but 6 months of working for the organization had taught him to read between carefully chosen words. These people didn't gather information, they solved problems permanently, and Sophia Blackwood had apparently become someone's very expensive problem. He'd taken the work out of desperation. Sarah's medical bills and funeral expenses had crushed him financially, and Chloe needed stability after losing her mother. The organization found people like Marcus, skilled, desperate, and morally flexible enough to rationalize necessary compromises. But watching Sophia answer her phone with trembling hands, her professional composure cracking as she discussed another failed business deal, Marcus felt his carefully constructed emotional distance beginning to erode. "Yes, I know the Singapore contract fell through. No, I don't need anyone here tonight." When she hung up, tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Marcus had seen that expression in his own mirror too many times to ignore it now. The moment stretched like pulled steel as Sophia raised the spoon toward her lips, and Marcus realized his obsessive planning had missed the most important variable of all, his own conscience. "Don't eat that!" The words exploded from his chest before his tactical mind could stop them. 3 months of preparation abandoned in favor of instinct he'd thought was buried with Sarah. The spoon clattered against the plate as every head turned toward him. Marcus approached her table, his heart hammering against his ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with his breathing exercises. "I'm sorry for shouting," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "But there are pine nuts in that mascarpone. I saw the chef preparing it differently tonight, and I noticed your medical bracelet." He gestured to the thin gold band on her wrist that his surveillance had identified weeks ago. Sophia's hand flew to her throat, understanding flooding her face. "Pine nuts? But that could have killed me." She stared at the ruined dessert, then back at Marcus. "How did you even notice that?" Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. This was the moment where his cover story would either hold or collapse completely. "My daughter has food allergies. You develop eyes for these things when someone you love could die from the wrong ingredient." It wasn't entirely false. Chloe did have sensitivities, though nothing as severe as Sophia's condition. But Marcus had learned to read medical alerts and dietary restrictions during his months of surveillance work, skills that served multiple purposes in his current profession. "What's your name?" Sophia asked. "Marcus Williams." "Well, Marcus Williams, it appears you may have saved my life." Her voice carried genuine gratitude mixed with something like surprise, as if kindness from strangers had become unexpected in her world. Marcus found himself studying her face more carefully than his professional training recommended. Up close, Sophia looked younger than her business magazine photographs suggested, but also more fragile. The kind of brittleness that came from carrying responsibilities too heavy for one person. "Can I offer you a ride home?" she asked. "My driver is waiting outside. It's the least I can do for someone who—" She paused, as if the simple act of expressing gratitude required translation into a language she rarely spoke. Marcus knew he should decline, maintain the professional distance his employers expected. But something in Sophia's hopeful expression made the word yes emerge before he could calculate the strategic implications. The Ferrari's leather interior probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, but Sophia seemed uncomfortable with the luxury, adjusting her seatbelt with nervous movements that suggested wealth was more burden than blessing. "Tell me about your daughter," she said as they navigated Manhattan's evening traffic. "Chloe. She's 7. Marcus felt his face soften automatically. "She has this way of seeing possibilities where other people see problems. Last week she turned our fire escape into an art studio because she said the apartment needed more light. She sounds remarkable. What does she think about your work?" Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that every detail was being filed away by an intelligence that had built corporate empires. "She knows I work hard to take care of us both. After her mother died, I promised I'd do whatever it took to give her stability." "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you. Sarah was—" Marcus paused, surprised by how much he wanted to share with this woman who was supposed to be nothing more than an assignment. "She had this gift for making people feel seen. Important. Losing her changed everything about how I look at the world." They pulled up outside his Queens apartment building, 5 stories of weathered brick that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming Ferrari. Marcus expected judgment or at least curiosity about the obvious wealth disparity, but Sophia simply studied the building with genuine interest. "Marcus," she said as he prepared to leave, "I'd like to offer you a position. Personal security, substantially better compensation than restaurant work, healthcare, retirement benefits, college fund contributions, everything a father should have when he's providing for his family alone." Marcus felt his world shift beneath him. This was beyond anything his handlers had anticipated. Direct access to Sophia's inner circle, her daily routines, her private vulnerabilities. It was also the solution to every financial problem that had driven him to this work in the first place. But looking at Sophia's face, Marcus realized she wasn't making a strategic business decision. She was reaching out to someone who had shown her unexpected kindness, offering trust to a person who didn't deserve it. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "It's a significant change." Sophia handed him her business card, the expensive paper warm from her palm. "Call me when you've decided. And Marcus, thank you again. It's been a long time since someone looked out for me without expecting something in return." As Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, his phone buzzed with the encrypted number he'd been dreading. "Report status immediately." He stared at the message, then typed back, "Target trusting, proceeding as planned. But even as he sent the response, Marcus knew something fundamental had shifted. The woman in that restaurant wasn't the cold corporate predator described in his briefing materials. She was someone who looked at a simple dessert like it might be her only moment of peace in an overwhelming day. 3 days later, Marcus stood in Sophia's corner office, officially accepting her offer of employment. The 42nd floor views were spectacular, but what struck him most was how the space felt more like a fortress than a workplace. All security monitors and reinforced glass, designed to keep threats at bay. "Your primary responsibility is my personal safety," Sophia explained as they reviewed his contract. "I've made enemies in business, people who see eliminating me as the simplest solution to their problems. I need someone who understands that discretion and loyalty aren't just professional requirements. They're survival necessities." Marcus signed the paperwork, acutely aware of the irony in her words. What specific threats should I be aware of? Corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, the occasional unhinged investor who thinks I've personally destroyed their portfolio. Sophia's laugh had no humor in it. Sometimes I think the only difference between legitimate business and organized crime is the quality of the suits. Over the following weeks, Marcus discovered that his new position required him to become intimate with loneliness in ways his surveillance training hadn't prepared him for. Sophia's penthouse apartment was a showcase of elegant isolation, expensive furniture that looked unused, a kitchen clearly designed for caterers rather than cooking, bedrooms that felt more like hotel suites than personal spaces. She worked 16-hour days, ate most meals at her desk, and seemed to have no relationships that weren't transactional in nature. Marcus found himself making small adjustments to her environment, straightening a wobbly chair in the conference room, leaving extra coffee in the break area for the night security guards, ensuring the temperature in her office stayed comfortable without being asked. "You're different from my previous security team," Sophia observed one evening as they left another corporate function where she'd been professionally pleasant but emotionally distant with everyone she encountered. "Different how?" Marcus asked, settling into the Ferrari's passenger seat. "They treated me like cargo to be transported safely from point A to point B. You seem to actually notice things, whether I'm tired, stressed, hungry. It's thoughtful." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, a mixture of pride and guilt that made his breathing exercises less effective than usual. "Taking care of people is what I'm good at." "Is that what you did before? Take care of people?" The question carried layers Marcus wasn't prepared to navigate. "I taught martial arts, mostly to kids who needed discipline and confidence. There's something about helping someone discover their own strength that—" He trailed off, realizing he was revealing more than his cover identity should allow. "That feels meaningful," Sophia finished. "I understand that. Sometimes I think I got so focused on building something significant that I forgot to make sure it actually mattered to anyone." As Marcus's access to Sophia's life deepened, so did his understanding of her isolation and his own conflicted feelings about his mission. His handlers expected detailed intelligence reports about her security measures, daily routines, personal vulnerabilities. Instead, Marcus found himself filing increasingly vague updates, buying time while he wrestled with what he'd gotten himself into. The first crack in his carefully constructed plan came during his 6th week of employment, when Marcus made his first significant tactical error. He'd been so focused on mapping Sophia's apartment's security systems that he failed to notice Chef Romano placing a small tracking device under his cleaning cart during one of his shifts at the restaurant. The mistake revealed itself 3 days later when Marcus found himself being followed by professionals who knew his routes better than they should have. His obsessive planning had created blind spots. He'd been so concerned with controlling major variables that he'd missed obvious smaller ones. "We have a problem," he told Sophia as they entered her office that morning. "Someone's been tracking my movements. Either they know about my background, or they're planning something that requires precise timing of our schedules. Sophia studied his face with the analytical intensity that had built her corporate empire. How long have you suspected? Since yesterday. I should have caught it sooner, but I made assumptions about source vectors that turned out to be wrong. Marcus touched the red ribbon on his wrist, finding little comfort in Chloe's lucky charm. I need to adjust our security protocols immediately. What kind of adjustments? New routes, different timing patterns, additional background checks on everyone with access to our daily schedules. Marcus's mind was already racing through contingencies, his tendency toward over-planning kicking into overdrive. I may have compromised your safety through my own oversight. Sophia was quiet for several moments, and Marcus braced himself for the professional disappointment he'd seen in clients' faces before. Instead, she surprised him with something approaching understanding. Marcus, in my business, the people who never make mistakes are usually the ones who never take real risks. What matters is how quickly you recognize problems and adapt to solve them. That afternoon brought the phone call that changed everything. Marcus was conducting a routine security sweep of Sophia's apartment when he overheard her conversation with someone she called federal contacts. I don't care what the board thinks, Sophia was saying, her voice tight with determination. I won't be part of my father's legacy anymore. The arms trafficking, the money laundering, all of it ends with me. I'm turning over everything to the prosecutors next month. Marcus felt puzzle pieces clicking into place with devastating clarity. Sophia wasn't just a successful businesswoman. She was the heir to a criminal empire, and she was preparing to destroy it from within. That's why someone wanted her eliminated, and why his employers had been so specific about timeline and methods. His phone buzzed with the familiar encrypted number. Timeline accelerated, complete assignment within 48 hours or face consequences. Marcus stared at the message, his breathing exercises useless against the realization that he'd been hired not just to kill, but to serve as a convenient scapegoat. When Sophia died, he would be the inside man who took the blame, the disgruntled employee whose background made him a perfect patsy. That night, Marcus sat in his Queen's apartment kitchen, staring at Chloe's latest artwork covering the refrigerator. A crayon drawing of their family that included a new figure labeled Sophia with a crown and a smile. His 7-year-old daughter had met his employer exactly once, during an emergency babysitting situation, and had immediately declared her lonely but nice. "Daddy, why do you look worried?" Chloe asked, padding into the kitchen in her pajamas. Did something bad happen at work? Marcus looked at his daughter's concerned face and felt something break inside his chest. For months, he'd been telling himself that his work was morally neutral, that he was simply providing security services in exchange for the money that gave Chloe stability and opportunities. But sitting across from her innocent trust, Marcus couldn't find any rationalization that made contract killing sound like responsible parenting. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, "if Daddy had to make a choice between doing something that would hurt a good person or protecting our family, what do you think Mommy would want him to do?" Chloe considered this with the seriousness she brought to all moral questions. Mommy used to say that protecting people you love is important, but being someone they can be proud of is more important. Because if you do bad things, even for good reasons, it changes who you are inside. The wisdom in her 7-year-old answer hit Marcus like physical force. Sarah had indeed said exactly that during one of their late-night conversations about the ethical complexities of his martial arts instruction. Some students came to him for confidence, others for violence, and navigating those motivations required constant moral calibration. The next morning brought a message that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. "Mr. Williams, your daughter attends St. Margaret's Academy. Lovely school, though security could be improved. We trust you understand the importance of completing assignments on schedule." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of the life he'd built for Chloe. Her artwork, her school supplies, the special vitamins that helped with her food sensitivities, and realized he was trapped between two impossible choices. His phone rang. Sophia's number. "Marcus, I need you to know something," she said without preamble. "I've suspected for weeks that you weren't exactly what you seemed. Your skills are too advanced, your knowledge too specific. I had you investigated." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand that someone hired you to infiltrate my life, and enough to realize that you've been protecting me instead of following their original instructions." Her voice was matter-of-fact despite the gravity of what she was saying. "The question is, what do we do about it now?" Marcus closed his eyes, his breathing pattern completely abandoned in favor of something approaching panic. "They have backup plans, Sophia. If I don't complete the assignment, they'll eliminate both of us and make it look like I was a rogue employee who killed you and then himself. And they've threatened Chloe. Then we need to disappear tonight. Both of us. I have resources they don't know about, places we can go while we figure out how to stop them permanently." "What about your federal contacts? The evidence you're supposed to turn over?" "I've been digitizing everything for months. Financial records, correspondence, witness statements, enough to destroy the entire network my father built. What I need now is someone who can testify about their enforcement operations." Marcus understood immediately. "You want me to turn against them?" "I want us to finish what should have been finished years ago. Your people, my father's people, the entire criminal network that thinks it can decide who lives and dies based on profit margins and convenience." Marcus looked around his apartment one last time, memorizing details he might never see again. Chloe's finger paintings on the refrigerator, the stuffed elephant that had comforted her through the worst nights after Sarah's death, the careful budget calculations that covered their monthly expenses without quite stretching to cover emergencies. "What about Chloe?" he asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez next door. Can she be trusted?" "With my life." "Then we get her somewhere safe while we handle this. But Marcus, if we do this, there's no going back. We'll be fugitives until we can build a case strong enough to destroy them completely." Marcus touched the red ribbon on his wrist, thinking about the conversation he'd had with Chloe the night before. Being someone she could be proud of was more important than any amount of safety purchased with compromise. "Let's do it," he said. The next few hours passed in a blur of careful preparation and controlled panic. Marcus called Mrs. Rodriguez with a story about family emergencies and extended business travel, arrangements that would keep Chloe safe without revealing the true danger they were all in. Sophia liquidated hidden accounts and gathered evidence that she'd been compiling for years, financial records that would implicate dozens of people in crimes spanning multiple countries. They left Manhattan separately and met at a cabin in the Adirondacks that Sophia's father had purchased decades earlier as a safe retreat. The building was rustic and isolated, surrounded by forest and accessible only by unmarked dirt roads. My father used to say that powerful people needed places they could disappear if the world turned against them, Sophia explained, as they settled in with their emergency supplies and evidence files. I thought it was paranoia then. Now I understand it was survival wisdom. They spent their first night at the cabin compiling everything into a comprehensive case: financial records, organizational charts, testimony about methods and targets. Marcus found himself describing operations he'd participated in, violence he'd witnessed, compromises he'd made in the name of necessity. Speaking these truths aloud felt like surgical removal of infected tissue, painful but ultimately healing. There's something else I need you to know, Sophia said, as dawn light filtered through the cabin's windows. The reason someone wants me dead isn't just about my father's criminal empire. It's about what I discovered while investigating it. Marcus looked up from the laptop screen, struck by new vulnerability in her voice. My father wasn't just running arms trafficking and money laundering operations. He was also contracting with foreign intelligence services, selling American defense secrets to anyone willing to pay his prices. When he died and I inherited access to his private files, I found evidence of treason that goes back 15 years. Jesus, Marcus whispered. No wonder they want you eliminated. The people who hired you aren't just criminals, Marcus. They're traitors. And if we can't stop them, other people are going to die for their profiteering. The weight of what they were attempting settled around Marcus like gravity. This wasn't just about saving their own lives anymore. It was about preventing ongoing damage to national security, about stopping people who had turned patriotism into a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. But their sanctuary was short-lived. The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions cut through the morning quiet, and Marcus realized their pursuers had found them sooner than expected. "Boat dock now," he said, already moving toward their emergency bags. His tactical training kicked in, calculating escape routes and defensive positions with mechanical precision. They made it to the lake as armed figures emerged from the tree line around the cabin. The boat started immediately. Sophia had maintained it personally, rather than trusting anyone else with their primary escape route, and they pulled away from shore as gunfire erupted behind them. "Is this what your life was like before you met me?" Sophia shouted over the engine noise and continuing rifle fire. "Actually, I was usually on the other side of this equation." Marcus returned fire toward their pursuers, more to discourage aggressive pursuit than with any hope of accuracy at this range. Despite everything, the immediate danger, the uncertain future, the very real possibility of death in the next few minutes, Marcus found himself almost laughing. Not the bitter humor of desperation, but something approaching joy. For the first time since Sarah's death, he was fighting for something uncomplicated and pure, protecting someone who mattered to him, stopping genuine evil, creating a world where Chloe could grow up without men like him. They made it across the lake and into the state park beyond, abandoning the boat for hiking trails that would eventually connect them to transportation and communication networks. The forest remained quiet behind them as they climbed toward higher ground, suggesting their attackers were regrouping rather than pursuing immediately. The FBI field office in Albany became their destination and their salvation. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison, a career organized crime investigator, recognized the significance of their evidence within minutes of reviewing their compiled files. "This is substantial," she said after 2 hours of preliminary examination. "Financial crimes, weapons trafficking, foreign intelligence violations, enough to justify immediate protective custody while we build prosecutions against everyone involved. But I have to ask, Mr. Williams, are you prepared to testify against people who will certainly try to kill you for cooperating?" Marcus thought about Chloe. Safe with Mrs. Rodriguez, but growing up in a world where people like him solved problems through violence. "My daughter is 7 years old. I want her to live in a world where men like me aren't necessary, where problems get solved through law and justice instead of contract killing. If my testimony helps create that world, then yes, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes." The trial stretched across 8 months. Marcus spent that time in witness protection with Chloe in a small Montana town, while Sophia worked with federal prosecutors from a secure facility in Colorado. They maintained contact through monitored communications, their relationship deepening despite physical separation. Marcus found unexpected peace in their temporary life. Teaching Chloe to fish in mountain streams, helping her with homework at their kitchen table, watching her make friends at the local school, simple activities that felt revolutionary after years of moral compromise and emotional numbness. When the final verdict came down, guilty on all major counts for 17 defendants, including his former handlers, Marcus received word that Sophia had been released from protection and was requesting permission to visit them in Montana. She looked different, stepping off the commercial airliner in Billings, younger, lighter, as if testifying against her father's criminal empire had lifted weight she'd been carrying since childhood. Her expensive business suits had been replaced with jeans and a simple sweater, and when she embraced him at the gate, it felt like coming home to a life he'd never thought possible. "You look good," she said. "Mountain air agrees with you. You look free." Marcus replied, meaning it completely. Chloe was waiting at their safe house with another crayon masterpiece, 3 figures holding hands in front of snow-capped mountains, standing beneath a rainbow that took up half the sky. "I drew us as a real family now," she announced with 8-year-old directness. "Can Sophia stay with us forever?" "I would very much like that," Sophia replied, kneeling to accept the artwork with hands that trembled slightly. "If that's okay with both of you." "Can you cook better than Daddy?" Chloe asked practically. "Because everything he makes tastes like it needs more something." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the mountain valley like a promise of better days ahead. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony overlooking the lake where they'd escaped together, with Agent Morrison serving as their witness. The service was simple and focused on promises rather than pageantry, and when Marcus kissed his new wife as the sun set behind the peaks, he felt Sarah's blessing in the evening breeze. They kept the Montana house as a retreat, but returned to New York to rebuild their lives. Sophia transformed Blackwood Industries into something her father would have recognized but never understood, a company that created value through innovation and ethical business practices rather than exploitation and violence. Marcus worked beside her as head of security, his experience with criminal networks making him uniquely qualified to identify and prevent the kinds of threats that most legitimate businesses never had to consider. But it was the quiet moments that meant everything to both of them. Sunday mornings when Chloe would climb into their bed to share her dreams from the night before. Evening walks through Central Park when the city felt peaceful instead of threatening. Family dinners where conversation centered on homework assignments and weekend plans rather than corporate strategy or survival tactics. One evening, as they sat on their apartment balcony watching the sunset over Manhattan, Sophia asked Marcus about the moment everything changed for him. "When did you know you couldn't follow through with killing me?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "When I saw you look at that tiramisu like it might be the one good thing in an otherwise overwhelming day. You weren't a target anymore. You were just another person trying to find small moments of happiness in a world that doesn't make it easy." From inside their apartment, they could hear Chloe practicing piano, simple melodies that spoke of childhood unburdened by the shadows that had defined her father's recent past. It was the sound of normalcy, of a future built on truth rather than deception. Marcus touched the red ribbon still tied around his wrist. Chloe had replaced it several times, but the ritual remained constant, and felt genuinely at peace with the man he had become. He was reaching for Sophia's hand when her phone chimed with a new message. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted from contentment to sharp alertness that Marcus recognized from countless corporate battles. "What is it?" he asked. Sophia held up the phone so he could read. "Miss Blackwood, congratulations on your new family. We hope you're enjoying your peaceful life. However, certain parties believe you may still possess information that belongs to them. Not everyone was captured in the recent trials. We'll be in touch." Marcus felt familiar tactical instincts sharpening, muscle memory responding to implied threat even as his conscious mind processed the implications. They had dismantled one network, but others had clearly survived and evolved. From inside their apartment, Chloe's piano practice continued. Innocent melodies that contrasted sharply with the darkness creeping back into their carefully constructed piece. Marcus looked at his wife, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. "How many people could have gotten this number?" he asked quietly. "Very few, which means either they have access to federal databases or—" Sophia's voice trailed off as another message arrived. This one contained only an address, a time, tomorrow, 8 p.m., and 4 words that chilled them both. Come alone, or else. Marcus stood and pulled Sophia closer as the New York skyline glittered before them, beautiful and treacherous as always. They had found their way home and built their family once, survived impossible odds through partnership and determination. Now it seemed the game was starting over, but this time they weren't running scared or fighting alone. This time they were guardians with everything worth protecting, and they understood exactly what that meant. "What do we do?" Sophia whispered. Marcus adjusted the red ribbon on his wrist and began his breathing pattern. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 8 counts out. We do what we've always done. We protect each other. We protect what matters most. And we make sure our daughter grows up in a world where people like me aren't necessary. He looked toward the apartment where Chloe practiced her scales, oblivious to gathering storm clouds, but safe in the knowledge that her family would face whatever came next together. "But this time," Marcus continued, "we're ready for everything.